Hello there everyone, this is me Ethan here, and last weekend I saw Thor Love and Thunder opening night, so here are my thoughts. Now, of course I had to see Thor Love and Thunder opening night because I absolutely love Thor Ragnarok. It is one of my top favorite MCU movies. Taika Waititi completely reinvented the character of Thor, infusing the movie with essentially Red Bull and a synth soundtrack, and it was just an amazing movie that introduced a ton of new characters. The humor was top notch, the heart was top notch, and it balanced the darker moments pretty well. Safe to say, I absolutely love this film. It's one of my favorite films of all time, superhero and MCU aside, so I could absolutely not wait for the sequel that was still coming from Taika Waititi. Of course, the main talking point here is it going to be better than Ragnarok? And we're also going to talk a lot about the comedy. And for the comedy, I actually really enjoyed it. I laughed a lot during this film. It is still one of the funniest MCU films to date, in my opinion. And it was just an overall feel-good superhero movie, which I was really missing this year after the darker Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness and the Batman. I needed a feel-good superhero movie this summer, and this exactly delivered, and it may just be the closest thing we'll ever get to a Marvel or MCU rom-com, which I find pretty funny. With that said, the character of Gorr the God Butcher is very dark, and I don't feel like he meshed well into the film, and I'll get to him later. I'll get to all of the characters later, but characters like Gorr the God Butcher, as well as Jane Foster's Mighty Thor, had some very deep and thoughtful character moments that I really felt could be a little more fleshed out, and it felt like a bunch of serious moments wedged in between a bunch of comedic moments, unlike Ragnarok, which was serious moments or comedic moments surrounded by serious moments. It was a little more balanced in Thor Ragnarok, and it wasn't as balanced in Thor Love and Thunder, in my opinion. Now, going back to Christian Bale's Gorr the God Butcher, he was outstanding, perfect casting, he did amazing, he fit into the story, he just didn't fit into the style of the movie, in my opinion, and he just felt like this really dark character in an otherwise cartoon movie. Now, a lot of people are saying this entire film is taken as a joke, and I partially disagree because I think there are some really well done serious moments, especially towards the final act. Towards that first act, it doesn't really take anything seriously, but as it progresses, it takes a little bit of time to just take a moment and not have too much comedic moments. But right after that, it's continued by a comedic moment, which, like I said, it is not at all very balanced. But I do think there are some really good solid moments in this film, some serious moments in this film that I really enjoyed, and I completely disagree, or I partially disagree, that almost everything was comedic. Now, as much as I actually really enjoyed a lot of the comedy and found a lot of the moments super hilarious and it had the theater laughing out loud, the one thing that I didn't like from the humor were the goats, the screaming goats. You've seen them in the trailer, you've seen the Lego set. They're funny about 2 times in the beginning, 1 time in the third act, and that's about it. It's just a recurring thing that they're constantly screaming. It uses the meme sound from like 2010, like the early 2010s, whenever that meme was really popular about that screaming goat. And if this movie came out in 2010, people would have died laughing because it was the funniest thing on the internet at the time. But here we are, like a decade later, and screaming goats aren't that funny anymore to the internet and many people now, and I overall didn't find it all that funny except for just a couple moments. Moving on to the characters, Chris Hemsworth, as always, is fantastic as Thor. I've always thought every single performance he's given throughout the MCU has been absolutely perfect, and almost every single time they've shown Thor, I've gotten a kick out of him, even if he was a little bit underutilized in Avengers Endgame and he wasn't at his best. Before that, in Avengers Infinity War, Captain America Civil War, Avengers Age of Ultron, Avengers, Thor Dark World even. I love Chris Hemsworth as Thor. He is an absolute perfect casting, and it's clear that he is having the time of his life on this film set. But at times, I feel like Taika Waititi is going just too overboard with the idiot sort of caricature now of Thor. He's becoming just slowly more stupid. And he was always super comedic, even from the first Thor film, even in the Avengers, like that one scene where Tony Stark is saying, "Doth mother alloweth to wear her drapes," or whatever. It was like some sort of Shakespearean spin on it, making fun of Thor. Thor's always been a character that's been made fun of. He's always been a comedic character, but here he just feels over the top and cartoonish, and he is literally an idiot at some points during this film, and that is what bugs me most. Now, Thor's story arc is once again about him finding himself in the world and where he fits in. We've seen it a dozen times. I thought it was handled somewhat well. It could have been strengthened a little bit if we had a longer runtime, which I'll get to again in a little bit. But I found the ending for his character in this film to be extremely wholesome and pretty satisfying overall. I just wish it was a little more fleshed out and we got more from Thor's character and where he was going throughout this story. It was absolutely fantastic to see Natalie Portman back as Jane, now as the mighty Thor. I found her character to be very, very boring in Thor the Dark World. She doesn't really do much. She's just the scientist girlfriend on the keyboard while Thor is doing all the cool superhero stuff. She was never really fleshed out enough, which really sucks for such an Oscar award-winning actress. She could be doing a lot more. And here she is a lot better, and she is probably one of my top 3 favorite parts of this film. Now we finally get to see the breakup between Thor and Jane, and while I found it pretty funny at times, sometimes a little bit too over the top, like I said before with Thor's character, it felt like a Saturday Night Live sketch, and that's not really what I want. And it makes it feel more like a parody or a satire of Thor, which a lot of people have been calling it that. I enjoyed that aspect of it whenever we're on an action scene or whatever, and it makes fun of a superhero trope, but whenever it looks like a Saturday Night Live sketch, I can't take that too seriously. Now, it was a joke in Thor Ragnarok, but I think it was much funnier, and overall, getting to see that breakup scene and getting to see Jane back made this movie feel more like a sequel to Thor the Dark World than Thor Ragnarok did, which I can appreciate. Now, back once again to Jane. I thought she was the best that she's ever been in the MCU outside of that one What If episode. I thought she was pretty good in there, but I feel like her character is a lot more fleshed out in here. She actually has like this tragic backstory and stuff, which I won't get into, but I feel like they fleshed her out pretty well. But once again, if we had a longer runtime, we could have fleshed it out even more and gotten better serious moments, and there still are serious moments in there with her story, and I found those to be incredibly heartbreaking at times and actually really well done. I just wish there were more of it. And the way that she ends up getting the powers of Thor, I found to be very weak. Now, the way that she gets the powers of Thor is very similar to something that they did in the original Thor film. Won't get into it because this is a non-spoiler review. It makes sense, but the way they set it up was just really goofy. And like I said, it felt like an SNL sketch or a parody of Thor a little bit, and it just didn't really work for me. It felt too simple, felt too easy. If they sort of, I think if the writers took a little bit more time to explain it, would have felt a little bit more real and a little bit more believable. But sadly, it feels like a cartoon episode. I'm going to say that a lot. It feels like a cartoon. This entire movie does feel like a cartoon at times, and I feel like Jane was fantastic in this film. She was the best she had ever been, but the way they set her up being a superhero, very weak. Now on to Gorr the God Butcher. Christian Bale absolutely knocks it out of the park, and he is the best actor in this film, not even by a landslide, which is surprising considering we have such great casts like Natalie Portman and Taika Waititi and Chris Hemsworth and all these amazing actors and actresses. But by far, Christian Bale just knocks it out of the park. Every single scene he is in, he is intimidating. He is scary at times. Sometimes he's goofy, but it works for him. And I feel like he fits into that same old villain mold that we have from Phase 4. But he is a little bit more theological and thought-provoking, which I found very interesting. It's just not fleshed out enough, and we could have used more runtime, feeling like a broken record here. Now, Christian Bale easily could have been one of the most iconic superhero villains on screen of all time, up there with Heath Ledger's Joker, because he's so good. But if we had a longer runtime, he could have been a little bit more thought-provoking, and he's just in a 2-hour Marvel rom-com. And like I said before in the beginning, he doesn't exactly fit into this movie. So I think if it was a little bit longer, if we got a little bit darker scenes to balance it out, he would have been one of the best Phase 4 Marvel villains, and I think maybe the best. He just feels ever so slightly wasted, and the name Gorr the God Butcher isn't entirely lived up to. We do not see a whole lot of Gorr God butchering. We just see very little, and we know that he's a threat. There was one scene where Thor and friends are in one location. You may know what I'm talking about based on the trailers, and I thought Gorr would show up and do a bit of God butchering, but he doesn't, and that is so disappointing. I would have loved to see Gorr just throw it down with all these cool fictional gods and all, and he could have been such an imposing threat to Thor. Could have been such a good villain, but he's just not fleshed out enough. He's really good for what we get him for, but we needed more. Now, I'm going to put Korg and Valkyrie into the same category because they're both the kind of funny, quippy side characters. I still absolutely love Korg. He was so funny in Thor Ragnarok. I loved his little recaps that we get in here. He is such a fun character. Almost anything that comes out of his mouth is funny to me, except for a few occasions where he just states the obvious this time around, which is very cheap. Feels like very cheap, forced humor. Didn't laugh during then, but overall, he's still very funny, and I enjoyed him. Valkyrie felt very underutilized, sadly. I wanted more of Tessa Thompson. She was so good in Ragnarok, and I feel like they did more with her in Ragnarok than in Love and Thunder, and we get little teases and snippets of her past, just a little bit in conversation, but we don't get a whole lot of her, and we don't get a whole lot of Korg or Meek even. We don't see Meek hardly at all, but Korg and Valkyrie especially, we just don't see much of, and once again, could have used a longer runtime to flesh out our fun side characters that people have come to really enjoy. Now on to the Guardians of the Galaxy, by far one of the most disappointing aspects of this film. It was set up in Avengers Endgame that Thor was going to be a part of the Guardians of the Galaxy, and we hadn't seen the Guardians of the Galaxy since 2019. We hadn't seen Thor since 2019. They were both going to be together. We knew they were going to be in Thor Love and Thunder. I was expecting them to split at one point and then come back in the third act, but they don't. Feels like Taika Waititi just didn't know what to do with them, just sort of tossed them in the beginning to say, okay, yeah, Thor was with the Guardians of the Galaxy, and now they're out of here. There were some good moments. It was great to see the Guardians back on screen. For the brief time that they were there, they had some good, funny moments, but overall, what you saw in the trailers is exactly what you get. They're in there for like maybe under 10 minutes, and that's about all. On to Russell Crowe's Zeus. I didn't like him. I found him funny at times, but overall, Zeus is such a cool character. And you're telling me this is the Zeus we're getting in the MCU? Cheesy Russell Crowe Zeus who wears a little skirt and talks about... If you've seen the film, you know what I'm talking about. Anyways, he is just an absolute moron in this film. And the way that they use him is so strange, and I'll get back to that later. He's just... I don't even understand why he was in the film. He's pretty useless. He's pretty pointless. It's just to hop from point A to point B to see a new character, essentially. He was so dumb, found his character funny, but overall wasn't a huge fan. Now, with all my thoughts on those characters out of the way, let's talk about the story. I thought it was really fun, pretty simplistic, pretty easy to follow for a cheesy rom-com Marvel movie, a cheesy comedy movie, but it feels very similar to Shang-Chi and Legend of the Ten Rings, Spider-Man No Way Home, Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, a lot of recent Phase 4 films where already crazy person who is at first sympathetic gets possessed by an item or a weapon that makes them even more crazy. You know where they're coming from. They're interesting characters, but it's all about just being possessed by an item and them going even more crazy, which isn't really a solid villain motivation. Like I said, Gorr the God Butcher is great, but this film relies so heavily on weapons and items. I was all good with that in Doctor Strange. That makes sense. There's magic items all the time. It was much more interesting than anything Harry Potter could ever bring in with their wood wands. But with Thor Love and Thunder, I feel like it shouldn't rely so heavily on items. And going back to Zeus, especially with Zeus's lightning bolt that you see in the trailer, it's used to create a new power set for Thor, where if we knew about Zeus, why didn't we get his thunderbolt in any of the previous MCU films? That could have been so handy, especially like in Avengers Infinity War or Avengers Endgame. Why couldn't we have just traveled there? Thor apparently knows Zeus, but we don't ever go there, and it just creates a new power set, and it's just this huge continuity problem that drove me nuts. It just had me really scratching my head because it was a super fun scene the way they implemented his weapon in that final act. I really loved the final act as much as it was super goofy and cheesy. I absolutely love that kind of stuff, similar to Doctor Strange, where it's just this really cool, crazy, chaotic final battle. But it just had me scratching my head of why didn't we think of this within the past 12 years or 15 years in the MCU that we're now into. Now, the thing that Gorr is after, and I won't say what it is, I'm just gonna call it the thing. The thing that Gorr is after, he accesses it through a key, which I won't say what the key is for non-spoiler reasons, but he has to get the key to get to the thing, and to get to the thing, he can... It really begs the question why none of the other MCU villains used it, because it could have made their life 10 times easier, once again setting up items and places where we could have gone in previous MCU films. It would have helped out a lot, but because they're just introduced this late into it, it makes no sense why they're there, and it begs the question, why didn't we use this before? And Thanos especially could have used that little item, that little thing, in Avengers Infinity War, and it would have solved a lot of his problems very, very quickly. And for the final act, I absolutely loved it. It uses color in such a unique way. Gorr especially stands out in that final act, and he gets a lot of time to shine. Christian Bale, so good in those scenes. It uses color in such a fantastic way, uses some really fun music, has some really crazy moments. Some, once again, that use items that don't really make sense, but overall, I had a fun time with them. Now, for the post-credit scenes, non-spoiler, obviously. The first one I wasn't too crazy about. Seems like they just introduced a sort of bottom-of-the-barrel character for the MCU that sets up something that was introduced in the film. Wasn't too crazy about it, but the second post-credit scene I liked, and it was meaningful. And if I could talk spoilers, I would, but it worked really, really well. I almost wish it didn't happen because it sort of carried over a certain character's arc that was already pretty much fulfilled, but it still worked nonetheless. All in all, I give Thor Love and Thunder a 6.5 out of 10. It may be a hot take to say that I actually really enjoyed this. After all of my negative thoughts, I do not think this is one of the best Phase 4 MCU films, but if I were to choose, it's probably going to be the most rewatchable for me. Now, my thoughts may of course change on rewatch or on second viewing. I really want to see it a second time to solidify my opinions. But overall, for now, I thought it was tonally imbalanced, but a super fun time with a really good cast. My only complaints really is that the comedy could have been balanced with the more serious moments, and we should have gotten a longer runtime. But that's pretty much it. That's not too big of a complaint from me. And overall, I'm a pretty big positive person. Whenever it comes to movies, I can at least find something to find enjoyment out of. And for right now, it is a 6.5 out of 10. So there were my spoiler-free thoughts for Thor Love and Thunder. What were your thoughts and what is your rating? I would love to hear any and all opinions in the comment section down below. So with that all out of the way, if you enjoyed this review and if you all enjoyed this video, please be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And as always, I will see you all in the next one. Bye and have a great day.